What happens when the man you were taught to hate becomes the only person willing to save your life? In the middle of a deadly Montana blizzard, two enemies are forced into the same cabin, carrying years of grief, lies, and buried truths between them. But as the storm grows stronger outside, another storm begins inside their hearts. One that will challenge everything they believe about justice, honor, and forgiveness. If this story meant something to you, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to support more stories that speak to the heart.
The wind didn't just blow. It screamed. It sounded like a widow at a fresh grave, high and lonesome. 1878 wasn't a year for the weak, especially here. Not in the Bitterroot Mountains. I felt the cold in my marrow. It's a quiet kind of pain. My horse, Jasper, felt it, too. He put his head down. He pushed through the drifts. We were 10 miles from the nearest soul, or so I thought. Then I saw the splintered wood, a carriage wheel, hickory, snap broke like a dry twig. I followed the debris. There was a horse, dead in its traces, frozen solid. Then I saw the hand. It was small, pale. It reached out from under a shredded canvas. It looked like a silent plea for mercy. I climbed down. My boots sank deep. The world was white and dead, except for her. She was blue. Her skin was the color of skimmed milk. I pulled her out of the wreckage. She didn't move. She didn't groan. She was just a slip of a thing, wrapped in wool that was no match for a Montana winter. I checked for a pulse. There, a throb, faint as a bird's heart. I didn't think. I just moved. I wrapped her in my buffalo robe. I swung her onto Jasper's back. "Steady, boy," I whispered. We turned back toward the cabin. The heat hit us first, the smell of pine and old coffee. I laid her on the cot by the hearth. I worked fast. I rubbed her hands. I built the fire until the shadows danced on the log walls. That S, when I saw it, a gold locket had fallen from her pocket. It hit the floorboards with a soft thud. I picked it up. I flipped the latch. Inside was a name. Sterling. My heart went cold. Colder than the trail. The Sterlings. They were the reason my brother Jedediah was under 6 feet of dirt. They were the family I was sworn to evict. I looked at my Marshal S badge on the table. It looked like a heavy silver lie. She stirred. Her eyes opened. They were blue, deep like the ice at the bottom of the creek. She looked at me. Then she saw the name Thorn carved into the mantle. She saw my badge. She tried to shrink away. She thought I was the end of her story. I sat on the stool. I didn't reach for my gun. I reached for a tin cup of broth. "Drink," I said. My voice was rusty. It sounded like gravel in a tin pan. She shook her head. Her teeth were chattering. I looked her straight in the eye. I needed her to hear this, not just feel it. I needed her to know the truth of the man she was looking at. "Listen to me," I said. I kept my voice low. "I know who you are. You Rhea Sterling. My brother died because of your kinnis greed. By the law of the mountain, I should have left you to the wolves. That's what most men would call justice." I leaned in. The firelight caught the silver of my badge. "But I saved you because there is a law higher than a land deed. There is a right that comes before a badge. Every human being has a right to be seen. You have a right to be warm. You have a right to be safe. It doesn't matter what your last name is. It matters that you are a soul, breathing God's air. And a soul deserves respect. Always. No matter the feud, no matter the history." She stared at me. The fear didn't leave her eyes, but something else moved in. A quiet realization. "I don't save Sterlings," I told her. "I save people. Because if I don't respect the life in you, I lose the life in me." She took the cup. Her hands shook. She took a sip. Outside, the storm kept screaming. But inside, for the first time in 8 years, the silence didn't feel so lonely. It felt like a beginning. The sun came up the next morning with a cruel sort of brightness. It wasn't a warm light. It was that sharp white glare that bounces off fresh snow and stings the eyes. I stood by the small window of my cabin, watching the Bitterroot Peaks turn from a bruised purple to a blinding silver. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and the sharp, medicinal tang of the willow bark tea I'd brewed. I heard the cot creak. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I could hear her breathing. It was stronger now, not that ragged whistling sound from the night before. It was steady, a survivor's breath. "You reawake," I said. I kept my voice low. "Out here, loud noises are a sin against the silence." "I am," she replied. Her voice was still thin, like a piece of worn silk. But the tremors were gone. She was sitting up. I could hear the rustle of the buffalo robe as it slid to the floor. I turned then. She was leaning against the log wall. Her dark hair was a mess of tangles, and her face was pale. But her eyes, they were focused. She was measuring me. She was looking at the badge on the table, then back at my face. She was looking for a monster. "There is coffee in the pot," I said, "and some hardtack in the bowl. It isn't to Boston fare, but it'll put blood back in your veins." She didn't move toward the food. She kept her back straight. "Why didn't you let the cold have me, Marshall Thorne?" she asked. "My name is Clara Sterling. You know what that means. You spent the last 6 months trying to strip my family of everything we own." I walked over to the hearth. I moved them slow. I wanted her to know I wasn't a threat to her person, even if I was a threat to her property. I poured a cup of coffee and set it on the small table near her. "I told you last night," I said, "a name doesn't change the value of a life. But there's more to it than that. Something we need to be clear about." I sat down on the heavy wooden chair I'd carved myself. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. In the world of law, the kind of law I represent, we talk a lot about deeds and titles, I began. But there is a moral law that people forget. It's the law of personal dignity. It means that before I judge you as a sterling, I have a duty to listen to you as a human being. If I don't give you a chance to speak your truth, I'm not a lawman. I'm just a bully with a piece of tin on my chest. I paused. I let that sink in. Education isn't just about reading books, Clara. It's just about learning to see past a grudge. It's about the right to be heard. If I am going to take that land back, I am going to do it in the light of day. I'm not going to let a winter storm do my dirty work, because a victory won through someone else's death isn't a victory. It's a stain on a man's soul. Clara watched me. She didn't touch the coffee yet. "You talk like a man who has thought about this a long time," she said. "I've had 8 years of silence to think about it," I replied. 8 years since Jedediah died. I blamed your father. I blamed your husband. I blamed the very dirt you walk on. But hate is a heavy pack to carry up a mountain. It makes a man tired. It makes him blind. Clara finally reached for the cup. Her fingers were still red from the frost, but they were steady. She took a sip. She winced at the bitterness, but she didn't stop. "My husband didn't kill your brother, Silas," she said softly. "The records say otherwise," I countered. "They say the Sterling squeezed him out. They say they bought the notes on his ranch and called them in when the winter was at its worst. They say he was left with nothing but a rope and a rafter's beam." The words felt like stones in my mouth. Clara looked down at the dark liquid in her cup. "My husband was a businessman," she said. "He was hard. Maybe he was cold. But he followed the paper trail. He didn't know about the man behind the debt. He just knew the numbers." "That's the problem with your world, Clara," I said. "You think numbers don't have blood in them. You think a signature on a page doesn't have the power to kill. That's what people need to learn. Responsibility isn't just about what you do with your own hands. It's about the consequences of your choices, even the ones you make from a desk in an office. I stood up and walked back to the window. The snow was so bright it hurt. But you weren't at a desk, I said, turning back to her. You were in a carriage. You were fleeing, alone, with a locket and a bag of papers. Why? Clara went quiet. The silence stretched out between us. It wasn't an empty silence. It was heavy. It was full of the things people are afraid to say. I was going to sell it, she whispered. I felt a jolt in my chest. Sell what? The Thorn Ranch? All of it, she said. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw the steel in her. But not to you, Silas. I was going to sell it to Elias Vance. He's a speculator from Santa Fe. He is binding up the valley for the railroad. He offered me a price that would have let me take my brother Caleb and leave this God-forsaken territory forever. I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. Elias Vance was a wolf. If he got the Thorn land, the whole valley would be carved up. The creeks would be dammed. The timber would be stripped. You were going to sell my brother's legacy to a man who would destroy it. My voice was a low growl now. I was desperate, she snapped. Her voice found its strength. Caleb is 19 years old. He's a good boy, Silas, but he's headstrong. He got himself into a mess, a debt. A debt to people who don't use lawyers. They use lead. I needed that money to save his life. Is a piece of land worth more than my brother S. blood? I stared at her. This was the trap. This was the jagged edge of the world. One brother dead, another brother in the crosshairs. This is the lesson of equal value, I said, my voice shaking just a little. You are asking me to choose between my brother S. memory and your brother S. life. You think your brother S. safety justifies the destruction of my family S. history, and I think my family's history justifies the ruin of your future. I walked over to her. I stood over the cot. But here is the truth, Clara. A truth that most people are too scared to face. Both are true, and both are wrong. Human rights don't just belong to the people we like. They belong to the people who hurt us, too. Your brother has a right to live. My brother had a right to his home. When we start deciding whose rights matter more, that S when the world becomes a graveyard. Clara looked up at me. A single tear tracked through the dust on her cheek. So what now? She asked. Are you going to keep me here? Are you going to let Vance take the land because I can't get to the office? The storm isn't done yet, I said, looking at the clouds gathering again on the horizon, and neither are we. You're not going anywhere until you can stand on your own 2 feet, and I'm not letting you sell that land to a man like Vance. You can't stop me, she said. I am a U.S. Marshal, Clara, I said quietly. I can find 100 ways to tie that land up in court until the turn of the century. But I don't want to do that. What do you want? I want the truth, I said. The real truth, not the one on the deeds, not the one in the ledger. I want to know why you were really left for dead, because a carriage doesn't just flip on a straight trail, and a horse doesn't just drop dead from the cold in an hour. Clara S.'s face went even paler. She looked away. Someone didn't want you to reach that land office, I said. Someone wanted you gone, and they wanted those papers you carrying. I reached over and picked up her leather satchel from the floor. I hadn't opened it. I wouldn't. Not yet. In this house, I said, we respect privacy. It has a right. Every person has the right to keep their own secrets until they are ready to share them. I won't look in your bag. I won't pry. But you need to understand something. I set the bag back down. Out there, you are a target. In here, you are a guest. But if we're going to survive what's coming, and I guarantee you, Elias Vance, or whoever left you for dead is coming, we have to move past the names. We have to see each other as people first, not Sterlings, not thorns, just two souls trying to find the right way to live in a wrong world. Clara looked at the bag. Then she looked at me. She reached out and touched my hand. Her skin was cold, but her grip was firm. "My brother Caleb," she whispered. "He's a deputy in the next county, over Silas. He's been working for you. Did you know that?" I felt the air leave my lungs. Caleb, the kid I'd been training for 6 months, the boy who reminded me so much of Jedediah, it hurt to look at him. Sterling. The silence came back then. It was louder than the wind. It was the sound of a world shifting on its axis. I looked at the badge on the table. I looked at the woman on the cot. The silent mountain man had found her, but he had no idea that by saving her, he had just invited the storm inside his own four walls. "Drink your coffee, Clara," I said, my voice barely a breath. "We have a lot of work to do." I walked back to the hearth and picked up my sharpening stone. The rhythmic shh of the stone against my knife filled the room. It was a steady sound, a grounding sound. But for the first time in 8 years, I didn't feel steady at all. I felt like a man standing on a thin crust of ice, waiting for the first crack to show. The lesson for today was simple, though I didn't say it out loud yet. Transparency is the foundation of trust. And right now, the only thing transparent in this cabin was the fear in Clara's eyes. Everything else was buried deep under the Montana snow. I kept sharpening. I kept watching the window. The mountain didn't care about our feuds. The mountain didn't care about our names. It only cared about who was strong enough to keep the fire burning. I intended to be that man, even if it meant protecting the very woman I had spent a lifetime trying to hate. Because at the end of the day, a badge is just a piece of metal. But a man's word, his commitment to the rights of others, that S the only thing that doesn't tarnish. I looked at Clara. She was watching me again. "We'll find Caleb," I said. "Thank you, Silas," she whispered. I didn't answer. I just kept sharpening. The trail was cold, the enemy was coming. And the truth was the only weapon we had left. The blizzard outside didn't care about Caleb Sterling. It didn't care about Jedediah Thorne. It just wanted to blow the world flat. I sat by the fire. I watched the orange light dance on the steel of my knife. The silence in the cabin felt different now. It was thick. It was heavy with the weight of what Clara had just told me. Caleb, my deputy. The boy I'd been teaching how to read a trail and how to keep his head when the leads started flying. He was her brother, a Sterling. I felt a ghost of a smile, a bitter one. Life has a funny way of circling back. You think you were walking a straight line. Then you find out you've been walking a ring. "You requiet, Silas," Clara said. She was sitting up on the cot. She had the coffee cup cradled in her hands. The color was coming back to her face. Not a healthy glow yet, more like the pink of a fresh scar. I didn't look up, I'm thinking. "About Caleb, about everything," I said. I set the knife down. The whetstone sat cold in my hand. "I'm thinking about how a man can spend a decade building a wall around his heart. Then a girl and a snowstorm come along. They knock the whole thing down in a single night." I stood up. I went to the corner where I kept my supplies. I pulled out a bundle of dried bark. It was gray and brittle. I brought it back to the fire. "What is that?" she asked. "Willow bark," I said. "It is the lesson for the day. You want to survive the bitter roots? You need to know what the land gives you. You don't just take, you learn." I sat back down. I began to break the bark into a small iron pot. "Listen to me, Clara," I said. My voice was steady, rhythmic, like a heart beating in the dark. "In this life, there are two kinds of knowledge. There is the kind you get from books. Caleb told me you had plenty of that. But then there is the kind that keeps you from going into the ground before your time. I held up a piece of the bark. This is salicin, I told her. I made sure to say the word clearly. The Indians knew it long before we got here. You boil it. You drink it. It thins the blood. It cools the fever. It stops the pounding in your head. It's the Earth's way of saying it doesn't want you to suffer. I dropped it into the water. That's the first lesson, I continued. Wilderness competence. It is a person, right to be educated, on how to sustain their own life. A man who keeps this knowledge to himself is a thief. He's stealing survival from his neighbor. If I don't teach you how to find this bark, I am responsible for your pain when the fever comes back. Do you understand? Clara nodded. She watched the water start to bubble. I understand. You believe knowledge is a shared resource. I do, I said, because out here, a secret can be a death sentence. I leaned back. I looked at the rafters. Now about Caleb, I said. The name felt like a burr under a saddle. He's a good man. He's got a steady hand. He's got a clean soul. I've been training him for 6 months. I've been treating him like a brother, like the brother I lost. He admires you, Silas, Clara whispered. In his letters, he didn't call you by name. He just called you the old wolf. He said you were the only man in Montana who knew the difference between the law and the truth. I closed my eyes for a second. The old wolf. I felt a pang of something. Not quite regret. Maybe just a weariness. He didn't tell me his last name, I said. He just called himself Caleb. I didn't ask. In the territories, a man's past is his own business until he decides to share it. That's a part of the right to privacy. I respected that for him. I thought he was just a kid looking for a fresh start. He was, Clara said. He is. He didn't want to be a Sterling anymore. He saw what the name did to our father. He saw the weight it put on me. He wanted to be judged for what he could do with a horse and a star. I opened my eyes. I looked at her, really looked at her. And you? I asked. What do you want to be judged for? Clara set the cup down. She stood up. She was shaky. Her legs were like a newborn colt's. But she pushed through it. She walked to the center of the room. I want to be judged for my agency, she said. She used the word firmly. She stood tall, even as she swayed. I am not a victim of the trail, Silas. I am not a pawn in a land war. I am a woman who made a choice. I chose to come here. I chose to fight for my brother's life. I am a self-governing individual. I have the right to determine my own path. Even if that path leads me into a blizzard. I watched her. I didn't reach out to catch her. I saw the struggle. I saw the pride. That's the second lesson, I said. My voice was low. Conversational. The principle of autonomy. It means I don't get to decide what is best for you. I saved your life. That gives me a bond with you, but it doesn't give me ownership. You are your own master. If you want to walk out that door right now and die in the snow, that is your right. I'll tell you it. A fool, move. I'll tell you, the wind will tear the lungs right out of your chest. But I won't stop you. Clara looked at the door. The heavy timber was groaning under the pressure of the wind. She looked back at me. I'm staying, she said. Good, I said, because the third lesson is about the social contract. We are alone in this cabin, but we are not an island. When two people are gathered together in a storm, they form a community. And in a community, we have a duty of care. I have a duty to keep this fire hot. You have a right to the heat. You have a duty to tell me the truth about who is chasing you. Because if I am going to stand in the gap for you, I need to know the size of the hole I am filling. Clara sat down at the table. She pulled her satchel close. She didn't open it. Not yet. Elias Vance is a predator, she said. But he is a predator with a lawyer's tongue. He found out about Caleb's debt. He bought it up. He told me that if I didn't sign the Thorn ranch over to him for a pittance, he'd have Caleb arrested for a crime. He didn't commit. He has the sheriff in the next county in his pocket. I felt the anger rising. It was a cold anger, the kind that makes a man's hands go still. So you were going to sacrifice Jedediah's land to save Caleb's neck, I said. Yes, she said. And someone tried to stop me. Someone who wants that land, but doesn't want Vance to have it. Or someone who wants Vance to have it without paying a dime to a sterling. I stood up. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the latch. I could feel the vibration of the storm. Listen, I said. Under the howl of the wind, there was a sound, a rhythmic thud. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the trees. Horses, I whispered. Clara stood up. Her face went gray again. In this weather, desperate men do desperate things, I said. Vance, or whoever flipped your carriage. They aren't waiting for the spring thaw. They want the deeds. They want the silence. I turned back to the room. I picked up my Winchester. I checked the lever. Smooth. Here is the final lesson. For today, Clara, I said. I looked her dead in the eye. I wanted this to be the thing she remembered if the door burst open. Universal human rights are not a suggestion. They are the only thing that keeps us from being animals. The right to a fair trial. The right to be secure in your own home. The right to face your accuser. I stepped toward her. If those men come through that door, I said, they are violating the most sacred law we have. They are trying to replace the rule of law with the rule of the gun. And that is where I draw the line. Not for the Sterlings, not for the Thorns, but for the principle of justice itself. Because if we let them take you, we are saying that might makes right. And if might makes right, then none of us are ever truly safe. Clara reached out. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight. What do we do, Silas? We hold the line, I said. I blew out the lamp. The cabin went dark. The only light was the red glow of the embers in the hearth. It painted the room in the colors of a sunset or a battlefield. I moved to the window. I pushed the heavy shutter open just an inch. The cold air sliced into the room like a razor. The snow was a white wall, but there, through the blur, I saw them. 4 riders. They were hunched over their saddles. Their horses were blowing steam like dragons. They were stopping at the edge of the clearing. They re-hear, I said. Will they attack? Clara asked. She was standing behind me. I could feel the heat of her breath. They'll try to talk first, I said. Men, like Vance, love to talk. They love to make it sound legal. They offer me a deal. They'll tell me they re-here to help you. They'll tell me you re a thief or a liar. I looked at the badge on the table. It was a dull glint in the dark. But they don't know the old wolf, I whispered. They don't know that I've spent 8 years learning how to listen to what isn't being said. I turned to her. Go to the back corner, I told her. Under the floorboards by the woodpile. There is a crawl space. Get in. Don't to come out unless I call your name. This is your right to safety. I am the marshal. It is my sworn duty to protect the civilian in my charge. That is the bargain I made with the people of this territory. I intend to keep it. Silas, I can help, she said. I can shoot. I know you can, I said. But that's a card we keep in our sleeve. For now, you stay hidden. Let the law do its job. She looked like she wanted to argue. Then she saw the look in my eyes. She nodded. She moved to the back of the room. I heard the floorboards creak. Then silence. I stood by the door. I waited. The wind roared. The cabin groaned. Then came the knock. 3 heavy blows. Solid. Confident. The sound of a man who thinks he owns the world. Marshal Thorne, a voice shouted. It was a big voice, deep, full of fake authority. We know you in there. We looking for a woman, a fugitive. She's dangerous, Marshal. She's stolen property from the Santa Fe Land Company. I didn't open the door. I didn't move. I am a U.S. Marshal, I shouted back. My voice filled the cabin. It was a roar of its own. You are trespassing on federal property. State your name and your business. Or turn those horses around and ride back to the hole you crawled out of. There was a pause. The wind seemed to hold its breath. My name is Elias Vance, the voice replied. And I have a warrant, Marshal. A legal warrant for the arrest of Clara Sterling. Open this door and let us handle this like civilized men. I looked at the darkness where Clara was hidden. Civilized men. I felt the weight of the Winchester. I felt the cold air on my face. The blizzard was a teacher, and today's final exam had just begun. You talk about being civilized, Vance, I yelled. But civilization is built on the integrity of the process. You don't serve a warrant in the middle of a mountain blizzard unless you trying to hide the truth. You want her? You wait for the spring thaw. You bring a judge. You bring a jury. Anything else is just a lynch mob with fancy words. I heard the sound of a hammer cocking on a rifle outside. Have it your way, Thorne, Vance shouted. The first bullet shattered the window frame. I dropped to one knee. I didn't fire back. Not yet. I waited for the rhythm. I waited for the pause. The lesson for tonight was going to be a hard one. The right to defense. And I was going to teach it with every ounce of lead I had. Stay down, Clara, I whispered to the empty room. I took aim at the flash of a muzzle. In the dark, the silent mountain man had found her. And now, he was going to show the world exactly what happens when you try to take what the mountain has decided to keep. Rhythm, breath, squeeze. The cabin exploded into light. The lead hit the heavy pine logs of my cabin with a series of dull thuds. Thwack, thwack. It's a sound you never forget. It's the sound of a man's intentions made solid. Elias Vance wasn't here to talk. He was here to erase the evidence. I stayed low. I crawled across the floorboards. The smell of burnt powder began to drift in through the shattered window. It's a bitter smell. It tastes like copper on the tongue. Stay in the hole, Clara, I barked. I didn't wait for an answer. I knew she was there. I could hear the faint scrape of her wool coat against the timber below. I reached the corner. I poked the muzzle of my Winchester through the gap in the shutter. I didn't fire wild. That is for amateurs and men who are afraid of the dark. I waited. I watched for the orange flare of a muzzle. There, behind the woodpile, I squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked into my shoulder like an old friend. A solid, predictable shove. I heard a shout of pain. A horse whinnied and broke for the trees. Thorne, Vance's voice came from the tree line. It was distorted by the wind. You obstructing a legal arrest. That woman is a thief. You are going to lose that star, Silas. You might lose your head with it. I didn't answer with lead this time. I answered with the truth. A star, isn't he? A piece of property, Vance? I yelled back. My voice was a hammer. It's a commitment, and you the one obstructing the right to due process. I let the words hang in the freezing air. I wanted them to hear it. Listen to me. You hired guns, I shouted. Every person in this territory, from the governor to the gallows bird, has a right to a fair hearing in a court of law. That is the principle of due process. It means the law moves in an orderly fashion. It means you don't settle debts with a midnight ambush. If you help Vance bypass the courts, you aren't lawmen. You just criminals with a different boss. Silence followed. Not a long one, but long enough to know ID hit a nerve. Men like to think they on the side of the right. They like to have a reason to pull the trigger that doesn't involve cold-blooded murder. Then, a new sound. It was a whistle. Sharp. 2 short blasts, 1 long. It was the signal ID taught Caleb. I felt a cold sweat break out under my shirt. Caleb was out there. A lone rider came thundering out of the white wall of the storm. He wasn't hunched like Vance meant. He was riding hard, leaning into the wind. He pulled his horse up short, sliding in the snow, right between the cabin and the trees. "Hold your fire," the rider screamed. It was Caleb. I'd know that voice anywhere. It was the voice of a boy who was trying too hard to be a man. "Marshal Thorne, Don, to shoot. It's Caleb." I didn't lower my rifle. "Caleb, get inside." "These men are firing on a federal officer." "I know who they are, Silas," Caleb yelled. He didn't move toward the cabin. He stayed on his horse right in the line of fire. "Vance is with me. We here for my sister." The world seemed to stop spinning. I looked back toward the hole in the floor. I saw Clara's eyes peeking through the slats. They were wide. They were full of a terrible kind of hurt. "Caleb," she whispered. It was so quiet I barely heard it. I looked back out the window. "Caleb, listen to me. Your sister was left for dead on the trail. Someone flipped her carriage. If you with Vance, you with the men who tried to kill her." "That's a lie," Vance shouted from the trees. She ran the carriage into a ditch herself. "Marshal, she was trying to skip town with the company as deeds." "Caleb knows the truth. Tell him, boy." Caleb looked at the cabin. Then he looked at the trees. He looked lost. He looked like a kid who had been told two different stories and didn't know which one was his. "Silas," Caleb called out. His voice was shaking now. "Vance told me she was in trouble. He said she'd stolen papers. He said he was trying to save her from a prison sentence. He said you were holding her here against her will." I felt a surge of anger. Not at Caleb, at the man who had twisted him. "Caleb Sterling!" I roared. I used his full name. "Get off that horse and walk to this door. Now." He hesitated. Then he slid out of the saddle. He walked through the snow. He looked small. He looked vulnerable. I tracked him with my eyes, making sure no one in the trees took a shot at him. He reached the porch. I unbolted the door and pulled him inside. I slammed the timber shut and threw the bar. Caleb stood in the middle of the room. He was shivering, not from the cold, from the weight of the moment. He looked at the shattered window. He looked at the rifle in my hand. Then he saw Clara. She had climbed out of the crawl space. She stood there, wrapped in my buffalo robe, her face smudged with soot and tears. "Clara?" Caleb breathed. "You brought him here, Caleb?" she asked. Her voice was flat. "You brought the man who wants to destroy us to Silas S. door?" Caleb shook his head. He said he was helping. He said he'd clear my debts if I helped him bring you in quietly. He said it was the only way to keep me out of Yuma prison. I stepped between them. I grabbed Caleb by the shoulders. I didn't shake him. I just held him steady. "Look at me, Caleb," I said. He looked up. His eyes were wet.
"You've been my deputy for 6 months?"
I told him. "I taught you how to read sign. I taught you how to track a mountain lion. But I failed to teach you the most important lesson of all, the lesson of moral integrity." I made sure he was listening, truly listening. Moral integrity is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles, I said. I spoke each word like it was a nail being driven into a board. It means your loyalty shouldn't be for sale. Not for money, not for your own safety. When you made a deal with a man like Vance to go behind my back, you violated the principle of transparency. You cannot have a just society when the people in power make secret deals to bypass the law. Caleb looked down at his boots. "I was scared, Silas," he whispered. "Fear is a reason, Caleb." "It isn't an excuse," I said. "Every human being has a right to liberty. But that liberty is tied to individual responsibility. You are responsible for your choices. You chose to trust a wolf because it was easier than facing the truth. You chose to hide your sister's presence from me because you were afraid I'd follow the law instead of your heart. I let go of his shoulders. But here is the beauty of the law, son, I continued. The law doesn't care about your fear. It cares about the presumption of innocence. That is another fundamental human right. It means Clara is innocent until a prosecutor proves she's a thief in a court of law. It means you are innocent of conspiracy until I decide to press charges. Vance wanted to skip all that. He wanted to play judge, jury, and executioner in a snowstorm. That is the definition of tyranny. Caleb looked at Clara. He told me you flipped the carriage, Clara. He said you were trying to hide. Clara stepped forward. She touched Caleb's cheek. I flipped the carriage because a rider shot my lead horse, Caleb, she said. I was left for dead. If Silas hadn't found me, I'd be a block of ice on the pass right now. Is that what Vance calls helping? Caleb's face went hard. The boy was gone. The man was starting to show through. He turned back toward the door. He reached for his sidearm. Caleb, wait, I said. No, Silas, Caleb said. His voice was cold now. I have to fix this. I have to tell them. You go out there now, they'll kill you, I said. Vance doesn't need a witness to his lies. You're more dangerous to him now than I am. I looked at the window. The shooting had stopped, but the riders were moving. I could see their shadows circling the cabin. They were going for the back. They were going to fire the place. We have to move, I said. Clara, get your satchel. Caleb, get the extra ammunition from the mantle. Where are we going? Clara asked. The cellar, I said. It's got a stone tunnel that leads out to the root cellar by the barn. I dug it 5 years ago when the Blackfoot were restless. It's tight, but we can make it. I looked at the room, my home, the place where I'd nursed my grief for 8 years. I knew I might never see it again. Silas, Caleb said. He was holding a box of shells. I'm sorry, I really am. I looked at him. I saw the regret. I saw the dawning of a new understanding. Sorry is for a broken plate, Caleb, I said. For this, you need restorative justice. You have to make it right, not just with words, but with actions. You stay by my side. You protect your sister. You uphold the law, even when it's as hard, especially when it's as hard. That is how a man finds his way back to his own soul. A heavy thud hit the roof, then another. Fireballs, I hissed. They re-throwing kerosene rags. The smell of smoke began to fill the room. The dry cedar shingles were catching. Move, I yelled. I pushed them toward the trapdoor. We descended into the dark. The cellar was cold and smelled of damp earth and potatoes. I led the way with a small lantern, the flame flickering in the draft. We crawled through the tunnel. It was barely wide enough for my shoulders. The air was thin. Behind us, I could hear the roar of the fire as my cabin began to burn. The heat was pressing down on us, even through the dirt. I felt a pang of loss. Jedediah's chair. My books. The mantle where I decarved our name. It was all going up in smoke. But as I looked at the two young people crawling in front of me, I knew it didn't matter. Listen to the sound of the fire, I whispered, though they couldn't hear me. I was thinking about the right to property. It's a real thing. It matters. But it doesn't matter more than the right to life. A man can rebuild a house. He can rebuild a brother. We reached the end of the tunnel. I pushed up the heavy wooden door of the root cellar. We scrambled out into the cold. The barn was only 20 yards away. The horses were inside, sensing the fire, kicking at their stalls. The storm was our shield now. The white out was so thick, Vance's men wouldn't be able to see us from the front of the house. We slipped into the barn. The horses were panicked. Jasper was whinnying, his eyes rolling in his head. Easy, boy, I murmured. I threw a saddle on him. I didn't bother with a cinch tighten. There wasn't time. Caleb was saddling his own horse. Clara stood by the door, watching the glow of the fire through the snow. "It has gone," she said. "It's just wood, Clara," I said. "We still breathing. That is the only victory that counts today." I walked over to her. I took her hand. "Now we ride," I said. We going to the high pass. There's an old line shack there. It's hidden. We'll hole up until the storm breaks. Then we ride for the judge in Helena. "Will we make it?" she asked. "We have to," I said, "because the world needs to hear the truth. It needs to know that the law isn't something you can burn down with a kerosene rag." I looked at Caleb. He was mounted up. He looked steady. "You ready, deputy?" I asked. Caleb nodded. He touched the brim of his hat. "Ready, Marshal." We rode out of the barn into the teeth of the gale. The fire from the cabin was a giant, flickering orange ghost behind us. It lit up the snowflakes like falling sparks. As we climbed the ridge, I looked back one last time. The silent mountain man didn't have a home anymore. He didn't have a quiet life of grief. But as I felt the weight of the Winchester in my scabbard and saw the determination in the faces of the two people riding with me, I realized I had something better. I had a purpose. The lesson for the trail was simple. True justice requires sacrifice. I had sacrificed my home. Caleb had sacrificed his comfort. Clara had sacrificed her safety. But we were moving toward the light. We were moving toward a world where a name didn't determine your fate. We disappeared into the white. The mountains swallowed us whole, and somewhere in the dark, Elias Vance was realizing that he hadn't just attacked a cabin. He had woken a giant. The silent mountain man wasn't silent anymore. He was the voice of the law, and he was coming for the truth. Ride, breathe, survive. The bitter roots were watching, and they knew. The storm was just beginning. The smell of my own life burning followed us up the mountain. It wasn't just pine and cedar. It was the smell of Jedediah's old wool blankets. It was the scent of the leather-bound books I'd read 1,000 times in the dark. It was the dry, sweet smoke of 8 years of memories, all turning to ash in the bitterroot wind. I didn't look back. Looking back gets a man killed on a high-pass trail. Jasper struggled. The snow was belly-deep in the drifts. He groaned, a low, guttural sound of effort. Behind me, Caleb was leading the way for Clara. He was riding point, his eyes squinted against the whiteout. He looked older than he did an hour ago. Guilt does that. It puts lines on a boy's face that time hasn't earned yet. We climbed for 3 hours. The air got thin. It got cold enough to crack a stone. My beard was a mask of ice. Finally, the wind died down for a second. Just a breath. I pulled Jasper up. I raised my hand. Caleb stopped. Clara's horse, a steady bay, bumped into Caleb's mare. We were huddled in the lee of a granite outcropping. It was a cathedral of stone in a world of white. "We rest," I said. My voice was a ghost of itself. I climbed down. My knees didn't want to bend. I walked over to Clara. I reached up and helped her down. She was stiff. She was shivering so hard I could hear her teeth clicking together. "You doing well, Clara," I said. "I'm freezing, Silas," she whispered. "I know. The cold is a thief. It steals your will before it steals your heart." I looked at Caleb. He was standing by his horse, staring back down the mountain. The glow of the fire was gone now. Only the black night remained. "Caleb," I called out. He turned. He looked like he wanted to fall over. "Come here, son." He walked over. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He was staring at the snow. "I'm sorry about the cabin, Silas," he said. If I hadn't brought them." I put my hand on his shoulder. My glove was frozen, but the weight of it was real. "Listen to me," I said. I made sure my voice was firm, rhythmic. "This is the lesson for this stretch of the trail. The lesson of the primacy of the person. You re-grieving for a house. I'm grieving for it too. But a house is an object. A person is a soul. I looked from him to Clara. We have a hierarchy of values in this life, I continued. Objects have a price. People have a dignity. If I had stayed to save my books and let the fire take the two of you, I would have been a murderer. I would have traded the eternal for the temporary. We save the lives. Everything else is just lumber and laundry. Do you understand? Caleb looked up. He nodded slowly. I understand. Life over property. Always. Always, I said. That is the foundation of civilized ethics. It's just the first thing a lawman has to learn. If you don't value the person more than the thing, you'll eventually find a reason to kill for a pocket watch. I reached into my saddlebag. I pulled out a strip of dried venison. I handed a piece to each of them. Eat, I said. Calories are heat. Heat is life. Clara took a bite. She chewed slowly. She looked at me, her eyes sharp even in the dim light of the snow glare. Silas, she said, Vance is going to find us. He knows about the line shack. He has lived in these mountains long enough to know where a man goes when the world catches fire. I know, I said, but he won't find us tonight. Not in this blow. He'll wait for the dawn. He's a predator, but he's a cautious one. Clara reached into her damp satchel. She pulled out a bundle of papers. They were wrapped in oilskin, mostly dry. He doesn't just want me, Silas, she said. He wants these, but he is making a mistake. He thinks he is the only one who can read a title. I sat down on a flat rock. I leaned my Winchester against my knee. What do you mean? Clara knelt in the snow. She spread the papers out. She looked at me, and for the first time, the refugee was gone. The clerk was back. The woman who had spent 6 years in the bowels of the Boston court system was standing in front of me. You've been fighting for 8 years to get the Thorn Ranch back, she said. You've been using the substantive law of the territory. You've been trying to prove Jedediah was cheated. He was, I growled. Maybe he was, Clara said. Her voice was clinical now, professional. But in a court of law, procedural accuracy is more important than moral outrage. You've been looking at the why of the sale. I've been looking at the how. She pointed to a signature on the bottom of a deed. This is the transfer from Jedediah Thorne to Harlan Cross, my husband, she said. It was dated October 14th, 1870. Do you remember that day, Silas? I closed my eyes. I was in Santa Fe, serving a warrant. I didn't get back until November. Exactly, Clara said. But look at the witness signature. It is notarized by a man named Thomas Miller. I looked up the records in the Territorial Archive before I left Boston. Thomas Miller died on October 10th, 1870, 4 days before this document was allegedly signed. I felt a jolt in my gut, like I'd been kicked by a mule. A dead man witnessed the deed? I whispered. A dead man, Clara said, which means the document is void ab initio. It was never legal. It didn't matter if Jedediah wanted to sell it or not. The process was fraudulent from the very first drop of ink. Your brother didn't lose the ranch, Silas. The ranch was stolen through a procedural nullity. I stared at the paper. For 8 years, I'd been a marshal. I'd been the sword of the law. And I missed the simplest trick in the book because I was too blinded by my own grief. I didn't see it, I said. My voice was hollow. You weren't looking for it, Clara said. She touched my hand. You were looking for a villain you could shoot. You weren't looking for a clerk who had made a mistake in the forgery. I looked at her. I felt a surge of respect that had nothing to do with her being a Sterling. It was the respect for competence. This is the lesson for me, then, I said. I looked at Caleb. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted him to see his mentor admit a failure. Listen, son, I said. This is about the integrity of information. I spent 8 years acting on an assumption. I assumed the law had failed me, so I became a man who lived on the edge of it. But the law hadn't failed. My observation of detail had failed. I looked back at Clara. Every citizen has a right to accurate documentation, I'd said. It's part of the rule of law. If the records are false, the society is built on sand. Clara just showed us that the truth isn't always found in a gunfight. Sometimes it says found in the dates on a dusty ledger. That is the power of the informed citizenry. Without people like her, men like Vance can rewrite history with a crooked pen. Caleb shook his head. So the land, it's still yours, Silas? Legally? Legally, Clara said. It belongs to the estate of Jedediah Thorne, which means it belongs to Silas. My husband's claim was never valid. Vance's claim is based on a lie built on top of another lie. I stood up. I felt a strange lightness. The cabin was gone. My blankets were gone. But the ground beneath my feet, the actual soil of my brother C.S., legacy was firm again. We have to get those papers to Judge Miller in Helena, I said. He's the only one with the authority to set this right. Helena is a long ride, Caleb said, and Vance has the telegraph lines in the valley. He'll have every bounty hunter, from here to the Missouri, looking for a woman and 2 men. Then we ride the high ridges, I said. We ride where the law doesn't go, so we can bring the law back with us. I looked at Clara. Can you keep riding? I have to, she said. If I don't, Caleb goes to prison for a debt that doesn't exist. And Vance wins. I won't let that happen. Not after I've seen the truth. We mounted up. The horses were rested, their breath huffing out in great white plumes. We began the final push toward the line shack. The trail narrowed. It was a goat path, really. On one side, the granite wall. On the other, a drop into a black abyss that seemed to go on forever. Keep your eyes on the horse's ears, I shouted over the wind. Don't look down. Looking down is how you lose your sense of agency. You stay focused on the task in front of you. We reached the shack just as the sky was turning a sickly, pre-dawn gray. It was a low structure, made of unpeeled logs and a sod roof. It looked like a hump in the snow. I kicked the door open. It was empty. There was a small stove in the center and a stack of dry wood in the corner. Caleb, tend the horses, I ordered. Clara, get inside. I stayed outside for a moment. I watched the trail we'd just climbed. The wind was already filling in our tracks. The mountain was erasing our path. I went inside. Caleb had a fire going in the stove. It was small, but it was glorious. Clara was huddled near it, her hands outstretched. I sat down on a wooden bench. I looked at the 2 of them. A Sterling girl, a Sterling boy, and a Thorne who had spent a lifetime hating their name. We re a strange company, I said. Clara looked up. The firelight made her eyes dance. Maybe the world needs more strange companies, Silas. Maybe, I said. But we need to talk about the principle of reconciliation. That's the most important thing we're going to learn before we hit Helena. I leaned back against the log wall. Reconciliation isn't about forgetting what happened, I said. I wanted them to hear this clearly. It's not about pretending Jedediah isn't dead, or that your husband didn't play a part in it. It's about transcendence. It's the idea that we can be bigger than our history. We have the right to forgiveness, both for ourselves and for others. If we don't exercise that right, we read just ghosts haunting our own lives. I looked at Caleb. You made a mistake, son, I said. You let fear drive you. But you here now, you standing in the gap. That is your redemption. It is a human right to be allowed to fix what you broke. Don't to let the guilt eat you. Let it drive you to be better. Caleb nodded. He looked like he was finally breathing for the first time in days. And you, Clara, I said, You recarrying the sins of your husband. You don't have to. You are an autonomous individual. You are responsible for your own actions, not the actions of a man who is gone. By bringing these papers to me, you've done more for justice than 100 men with badges. Clara smiled. It was a small thing, but it was real. Thank you, Silas. Don't thank me, I said. Thank the truth. It's the only thing that is free in this territory. I stood up and went to the window. The sun was coming up now. It was a cold, golden sliver on the horizon. I saw them then. Far below, at the base of the ridge, tiny black dots against the white. Vance? He was coming, and he wasn't alone. They here, I said. Caleb reached for his belt. Clara grabbed her satchel. How many? Caleb asked. Enough, I said. I looked at the small room. I looked at the fire. The silent mountain man had found her. He had saved her from the snow. He had saved her from the fire. And now he was going to save the law from the men who thought they could own it. Get the rifles, I said. Today, we teach them about the inviolability of the truth. The mountain was silent. The sun was rising. The battle for the Bitterroots was about to begin. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting for a grave. I was fighting for the living. Check your sights, I whispered. The lesson was almost over. The reality was about to start. Lead, paper. Truth. The West was about to change, and we were the ones holding the pen. The dawn didn't break over the Bitterroots. It just bled. A thin, cold streak of gray light pushed through the clouds. It didn't offer any warmth. It just showed us what we were up against. I stood by the door of the line shack. I held my Winchester. My thumbs were hooked into my belt. I watched those black dots at the bottom of the ridge. They were moving slow, methodical, like ants on a sugar cube. Vance was a patient man. That's what made him dangerous. A man with a temper will make a mistake. A man with a plan will just wait for you to make yours. They'll be at the timberline. In an hour, I said. I didn't turn around. I heard the soft rustle of paper. Clara was sitting by the stove. She was still looking at those deeds. Caleb was by the back window. He was cleaning his sidearm. The click slide of the metal was the only heartbeat the room had. Silas, Clara said. Her voice was different. It wasn't the clinical tone of the clerk anymore. It was soft. It had a jagged edge to it. I didn't tell you everything, she said. I turned then. I looked at her. She was holding a small, yellowed envelope. It wasn't a legal document. It didn't have a seal or a stamp. It just had a name written in a shaky hand. Jedediah. My breath hitched. I felt the old ghost stir in my chest. Where did you get that? I asked. It was tucked inside the ledger, Clara said. In the back. Under the false bottom of the trunk I brought from Boston. I think my husband kept it as insurance, in case you ever got too close to the truth. I walked over to her. I sat down on the bench. My legs felt like they were made of lead. Read it, I said. Clara looked at the paper. She took a breath. Her voice was steady, but I could see her fingers trembling. Silas, she began. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Don't go looking for someone to blame. I did this to myself. I got caught in the cards. I thought I could win back the ranch. I thought I could be the man you wanted me to be, but the debt is too high. Harlan Cross offered me a way out, but I couldn't take the shame. I sold the land to cover the markers. I'm sorry, little brother, don't to carry this for me. Live your own life. The silence that followed was louder than the wind. 8 years. I had spent 8 years chasing a shadow. I had spent 8 years hating a family for a murder that never happened. I had built my whole life on a foundation of vengeance, and the foundation had just turned to dust. Jedediah wasn't a martyr. He was a gambler who lost his nerve. He wasn't a victim of the Sterlings. He was a victim of his own choices. I felt a roar in my ears. I wanted to break something. I wanted to scream at the mountain. "Silas?" Caleb asked. He had stepped away from the window. He looked at me with a mix of pity and fear. I stood up. I walked to the door. I pushed it open. The cold air hit me like a slap. I welcomed it. I needed to feel something real. "He lied to me," I whispered. I turned back to them. I needed to say this out loud. I needed to make the lesson real, for them and for me. "Listen to me," I said. My voice was raspy. "This is the hardest lesson a human soul can learn. The lesson of intellectual honesty. It means having the courage to accept the truth, even when that truth destroys the story you've told yourself for a decade." I looked at Caleb. "I spent 8 years making Jedediah a hero," I told him. "I gave him a sanctified identity. That's a fancy way of saying I made him a saint so I could have an excuse to be a sinner. I used his murder as a shield to protect me from the world. But that is a violation of the ethic of representation. We don't have the right to rewrite the lives of the dead to suit our own anger." I paced the small floor of the shack. "Jedediah was a man," I continued, "an autonomous agent. He had the right to choice, and he chose poorly. He chose the cards over the land. He chose the rope over the struggle. That was his burden, not mine. Not yours, Clara. Not your husband, S." I stopped. I looked at the Winchester leaning against the wall. "By refusing to see him as he really was," I said, "I denied him his individual humanity. I made him a character in a play. And in doing that, I lost 8 years of my own life. That is the price of a lie, son. It doesn't just hurt the people you tell it to. It eats you from the inside out." Clara stood up. She walked over to me. She didn't touch me. She just stood there, a presence of calm in the storm of my mind. "He loved you, Silas," she said. "The letter proves that. He didn't want you to carry the weight. But he didn't trust me with the truth," I said. "And trust is the currency of respect. By lying to me, he treated me like a child. He denied me the right to informed grief. He thought he was protecting me, but he was actually just trapping me." I looked out the window again. The riders were closer now. I could see the steam from the horses. They were starting the steep ascent. "Vance is coming," I said, "and he is coming for a lie. He thinks he can kill us and keep the land because he's the only one who knows the truth about Jedediah. He thinks he can hold that shame over our heads forever." I picked up the Winchester. I felt the cold walnut of the stock. It felt different now. It didn't feel like a tool of revenge. It felt like a tool of the law. "But he's wrong," I said, "because the truth is out now. And once the truth is out, it belongs to the world. It's part of the public domain of justice." I looked at Caleb. "You ready, son?" Caleb nodded. He looked steady. The guilt that had been weighing him down seemed to have shifted. He wasn't just a boy caught in a mess anymore. He was a man defending the truth. "I am ready, Silas," he said. "Good," I said, "because here is the final part of the lesson. The responsibility of action. Now that we know the truth, we have a duty to defend it. Not for the ranch, not for the name Thorne, but for the integrity of the record. We cannot let a man like Vance build an empire on a forged deed and a dead man's shame." I turned to Clara. "You stay by the stove," I said. "Keep the fire high. If they get past us, you know what to do." "I do," she said. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small, nickel-plated revolver. She didn't look afraid. She looked resolved. I stepped out onto the porch. The wind was whipping my coat. The gray light was getting stronger. Vance was at the edge of the clearing. He was a big man on a big horse. He was wearing a heavy bearskin coat. He looked like a king of the wasteland. He had 3 men with him. They were all armed. They were all tired. "Thorne!" Vance shouted. His voice echoed off the granite walls. It's over. Give us the woman and the papers. There's no point in dying for a gambler. As Ghost, I didn't hide. I stood right in the center of the porch. I let them see the star on my chest. You were right about one thing, Vance, I yelled back. Jedediah was a gambler, and he lost. I know the truth now. I've seen the letter. I saw Vance stiffen in his saddle. He hadn't expected that. He thought he was the only one holding the cards. It doesn't matter, Vance shouted. I have the deed. It's signed and witnessed. The law is on my side. A forged signature and a dead witness don't make a law, Vance, I replied. They make a fraudulent transaction, and a fraud has no legal standing. You aren't defending property. You recommitting an active felony. I leveled the Winchester. I am a United States Marshal, I roared, and I am declaring this ridge a zone of federal jurisdiction. You have 10 seconds to dismount and put your hands in the air. This is your notice of due process. Ignore it, and you are choosing the path of the outlaw. Vance laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. You re one man and a boy, Thorne. In a shack that's falling apart. I have the power here. You have the guns, Vance, I said, but you don't have the power. Power comes from the consensus of the governed. It comes from the belief that the law is fair. You've broken that contract. And when the contract is broken, you were just a man in a bearskin coat standing in the snow. Vance raised his hand. His men leveled their rifles. 3, I shouted. 4, 5. I felt Caleb step out beside me. He didn't say a word. He just cocked his pistol. The rhythm of the moment was perfect. The wind, the cold, the truth. 10, I yelled. Vance dropped his hand. The clearing exploded. Lead tore into the porch railing. Splinters flew like needles. I dropped one knee. I fired. I didn't aim for the men. I aimed for the horses. In a mountain fight, the horse is the most important piece of equipment. You take the horse, you take the mobility. One horse went down, another bolted. The clearing became a chaos of white snow and black powder smoke. Cover the left, Caleb, I shouted. I saw a man flanking us through the rocks. I swung the Winchester. I took a breath. I felt the pulse in my neck. Rhythm. Pause. Squeeze. The man tumbled back into a drift. He didn't get up. Vance was behind his fallen horse. He was screaming orders. He was trying to regain control. But the mountain was against him. The steep slope and the deep snow made every movement a struggle. This is the tactical reality of justice, I yelled between shots. I wanted him to hear me. I wanted the lesson to be the last thing he ever learned. You thought you could use the wilderness to hide your crimes. But the wilderness is an impartial witness. It doesn't care about your money. It only cares about who is prepared for the truth. A bullet grazed my ear. I felt the heat. I felt the sting. It didn't slow me down. It just made the world sharper. I saw Vance rise up. He had a heavy Sharps rifle. He was taking aim at Caleb. No, I roared. I didn't think about the law then. I didn't think about the process. I thought about the right to protection. I thought about the boy who had become a man on this trail. I stood up. I stepped in front of Caleb. I fired. Vance's Sharps went off at the same time. The heavy slug hit my shoulder. It felt like being hit by a freight train. It spun me around. I hit the porch boards hard. Silas, Caleb screamed. I saw the world go gray. I saw the snow falling in slow motion. But then I saw Vance. My shot had found its mark. He was slumped over his horse. His bearskin coat was stained red. He looked small now, just a man. A man who had built a kingdom on a lie and watched it melt in the sun. The remaining men saw their boss fall. They didn't stay to fight. They scrambled for their horses. They disappeared into the gray wall of the storm. The silence came back. It was absolute. I lay on my back. I looked up at the sky. The gray was turning to a pale, cold blue. The storm was breaking. I felt hands on me. Clara. Caleb. You re-hit Silas, Caleb said. His voice was shaking. It's just a shoulder, son, I rasped. I felt the blood soaking my shirt. It was warm. It was a strange comfort. I've had worse from a stubborn mule. Clara was already tearing her petticoat. She was making a bandage. Her movements were quick, precise. The lesson, I whispered. Hush, Silas, she said. No, I said. I looked at Caleb. Listen, this is the last one for today. The sacrifice of service. Being a lawman isn't about being right. It's about being willing to take the hit so the truth can survive. Do you see? Caleb nodded. He was crying. He wasn't ashamed of it. The truth is safe, Silas, he said. The papers are dry. Vance is done. I closed my eyes. I felt the cold air on my face. The silent mountain man had found her. He had found the truth. And in the end, he had found himself. The mountain was still. The sun was finally breaking through the peaks. The West was changed. Not by a gunfight, but by a letter and a goafu, says courage. Take me inside, I said. They lifted me up. We walked into the shack. The fire was still burning. The trail was over. The reconciliation had begun. And for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't afraid of the silence. I was at peace. The cabin smelled of blood and old wood smoke. It's a metallic scent, sharp. It cuts through the cold like a knife. I lay on that wooden bench. I watched the ceiling. The logs were dark with age. They had seen men come and go for 50 years. Now they were watching me bleed. Clara moved around the room. She was quick. Her hands didn't shake anymore. She had a bowl of hot water. She had clean rags. She looked at my shoulder with a steady eye. It went through, Silas, she said. The lead didn't stay to visit. That's the mercy of it, I grunted. Every breath felt like a hot coal was sitting under my collarbone. Mercy is a strange word for a sharp slug, Clara. Caleb was by the window. He was watching the trail. He held his pistol like it was part of his own arm. He looked older. The snow outside was turning blue in the twilight. The storm was finally tired. They re-gone, Silas, Caleb said. The ones who could still ride. They left Vance in the snow. I closed my eyes. I thought about Vance. He was a big man. Now, he was just a landmark, a warning to others. Listen to me, Caleb, I rasped. My voice felt like it was climbing out of a deep well. He turned. He looked at me. This is the time for the lesson, I said. The lesson of restorative justice. People think the law is about the ending. They think it's about the hanging or the prison cell. But that S, just the clearing of the ledger. Real justice is about the restoration. It is about how we fix the world that was broken by the crime. I winced as Clara pressed a warm cloth to the wound. Vance is dead, I continued. That is a fact. But his death doesn't put the Thorn name back in the good graces of the territory. It doesn't pay the debts Caleb owes. It doesn't give Clara back her peace of mind. We have a right to redress. It means we have the right to be made whole again. Not through more blood, but through the truth being told in the light of day. I looked at Clara. She stopped her work for a second. She looked back at me. Justice isn't a prize you win at a shooting match, I told them. It's a collective responsibility. We have to go to Helena. We have to show the judge those papers. We have to make the records match the reality. That is how we restore the balance. Anything less is just a personal grudge. And a grudge is a debt that never gets paid. It just keeps collecting interest in the form of more hate. Clara began to wrap the bandage. She pulled it tight. I felt the world tilt. You talk like a philosopher, Silas, she whispered. I've had a lot of quiet nights to read the stars, I said, and the stars don't care about your family name. They only care about the light you bring to the dark. That's the principle of human worth. Every soul has an inherent value that can be measured by their father, S, Sins, or their brother-s, mistakes. Jedediah lied to me. He failed himself. But his failure doesn't define my worth, and it doesn't define yours. I looked at Caleb. He was leaning against the wall now. You re a sterling, son, I said. But you re also a man. You have the right to self-determination. You re not a shadow of your sister-s husband. You are not a pawn for a man like Vance. You are the architect of your own character. That is the greatest freedom the law provides. The freedom to be better than the world expects you to be. Caleb nodded. He looked at his badge. It was pinned to his vest, catching the last of the firelight. I want to be a real marshal, Silas, he said. I want to protect people from the men who think they can buy the law. Then you start by protecting the burden of proof, I told him. In this country, a man's word isn't enough to condemn someone. We require evidence. We require witnesses. We require a standard of certainty. Vance tried to skip all that. He tried to use fear as his evidence. You never do that. You hold the line for the truth, even when the truth is ugly. Especially when it's ugly. The night deepened. The fire in the stove hissed. I felt the sleep coming. It was a heavy, dark blanket. We leave at first light, I said. We ride slow. We ride steady. You need to rest, Silas, Clara said. She put a hand on my forehead. It was cool. It felt like a blessing. The mountain doesn't rest, I whispered, and the law doesn't sleep. We recarrying the future of this valley in that satchel, Clara. Don't let it out of your sight. I want, she said. I drifted then. I dreamt of Jedediah. He wasn't the saint I'd imagined. He was just a man. He was sitting at a card table, looking at a hand he couldn't play. He looked up at me. He looked tired. He looked like he wanted to go home. I woke up twice in the night. Once to the sound of a wolf howling. It was a long, lonely sound. It didn't sound threatening. It just sounded like it was acknowledging the cold. The second time, I saw Clara and Caleb sitting by the fire. They were talking. Their voices were low. They were laughing about something from their childhood back in Boston. A memory of a summer day and a spilled bucket of berries. I watched them. The Sterling girl. The Sterling boy. The silent mountain man had spent 8 years trying to erase their name. Now, he was the only thing standing between them and a shallow grave. It was a strange trade, but as I felt the steady throb of my wound, I knew it was a fair one. The lesson of the night was simple. Life is a series of adjustments. You adjust to the cold. You adjust to the pain. You adjust to the truth. If you don't adjust, you break. I wasn't broken. I was just different. I closed my eyes and waited for the dawn. The bitterroots were quiet. The stars were bright. The debt of the living was being paid, one breath at a time. The descent was harder than the climb. Gravity is a relentless master. It wants to pull you down. It wants to hurry you. And hurry is what kills a wounded man. We moved through the timberline. The trees were heavy with new snow. They looked like old men in white robes, bowing as we passed. Silas Thorne sat tall in the saddle, but I could see the sweat on his neck despite the cold. His face was the color of wood ash. Caleb rode point. He was scanning every ridge, every clump of brush. He was a different boy now. The badge on his chest wasn't just a decoration anymore. It was a weight. I rode in the middle. I held the satchel tight against my side. Inside those leather walls was the truth. It felt heavier than all the gold in Santa Fe. We reached the valley floor by mid-afternoon. The world opened up. The white peaks were behind us now. The valley was a sea of brown grass and gray scrub, dotted with islands of melting snow. There is a settlement 5 miles ahead, Silas said. He spoke without turning his head. A place called Red Creek. It has mostly miners and cattle hands. It's got a doctor, A man named Doc Harrison. He knows me. Is it safe? I asked. I felt the eyes of the valley on us. In the mountains, you re alone. In the valley, you re a target. Safe is a relative term, Silas said. He pulled Jasper up for a second. He looked at us. Listen to me, he said. We are entering the realm of the social contract. Up there, it was just us and the elements. Down here, we are part of a community. And a community is built on a set of mutual expectations. We expect the people in Red Creek not to shoot us. They expect us to follow the rules of the town. This is the foundation of civic order. He took a slow, pained breath. But the contract only works if everyone believes in the presumption of innocence, he continued. If we ride in there and people have heard Vance's version of the story, they might think we re-outlaws. They might think they have a right to take us. That is why we move with public transparency. We don't hide. We don't sneak. We ride straight to the doctor, and then we ride to the sheriff. We act like the law, and the law will act through us. Caleb looked at him. What if the sheriff was on Vance's payroll, too? Then we appeal to the universal standard of justice, Silas said. We don't fight the man. We fight the corruption. We hold up the documents. We demand a public hearing. That is a human right, Caleb. The right to a fair and public trial. Tyranny loves the dark. Justice loves the light. We keep the light on us. We rode into Red Creek an hour later. It wasn't much. A single street of mud and gravel. A general store. A saloon with a sagging porch. A small house with a sign that said physician. People stopped to watch us. Men leaned against the hitching rails. Women paused on the boardwalks. It was the same look everywhere. Curiosity mixed with a hard edge of judgment. They saw a wounded marshal. They saw a young deputy. They saw a Goafu with a Boston coat. Steady, Silas whispered. We stopped at the Dr. S. house. Caleb helped Sila S. down. Silas staggered, but he kept his feet. He walked into the house like he owned the ground he stepped on. Doc Harrison was an old man with spectacles and hands that smelled of carbolic acid. He didn't ask questions. He just saw the blood. He led Silas to a back room. Caleb and I sat in the waiting area. It was a small room with a clock that ticked like a metronome. Talk, talk, talk. I'm going to the sheriff's office, Caleb said suddenly. He stood up. Silas said to wait. I reminded him. I can't wait, Caleb said. If Vance has people here, I need to know. I need to establish our presence. I need to exercise our right to legal notice. He used the words Silas had taught him. He stood tall. I saw the sterling chin. It was a strong chin, a brave one. Go then, I said, but be careful, Caleb. He stepped out into the mud. I sat alone. I looked at the satchel. I thought about the right to property. Silas S. Ranch, my husband's legacy. All of it was tied up in these papers. But as I sat in that quiet room, I realized that property was just a ghost. The only thing that was real was the man in the back room, bleeding for a world that didn't even know his name. Doc Harrison came out 30 minutes later. He was wiping his hands. He has a stubborn one, the doctor said. He has lost a lot of blood. The wound is clean enough, but he needs to stay put for a week. His body is at its limit. He won tea. Stay, I said. I know he won tea. Doc sighed. He's already asking for his boots. I went into the back room. Silas was sitting on the edge of the table. He was shirtless. A fresh white bandage was wrapped around his shoulder. He looked lean, hard, like a piece of mountain granite. Caleb is at the sheriff's, I told him. Silas nodded. Good. We need to establish a factual record before the rumors start. Red Creek is a small town. Rumors here travel faster than a prairie fire. He looked at me. His eyes were tired, but they were sharp. Clara, he said, you've spent your life around the law. You've seen the papers and the gavels, but you've also seen the victims. the ones the law forgets. I have, I said. I've seen women lose their homes because their husbands made a bad deal. I've seen children go hungry because a signature was missing on a form. Then you understand the ethics of compassion, Silas said. The law is a machine. It has cold. It's objective. But the people who run it must be warm. They must be subjective. We have a duty to the vulnerable. If we don't use the law to protect those who can't protect themselves, then the law is just a sophisticated way of being cruel. He reached for his shirt. I helped him put it on. He winced, but he didn't make a sound. Vance thought the law was a tool for profit, Silas continued. He thought the right to liberty was something you could buy. But liberty is an inherent quality. It belongs to you because you exist. It's not something a land company can take away with a forged deed. We are going to Helena to remind the judge of that. We are going to remind the territory that the law belongs to the people, not the highest bidder. Caleb burst into the room then. His face was flushed. The sheriff is out, he said. He says at a ranch 10 miles north, but his deputy is there. A man named Miller. He looked at me like I was a ghost, he said. He'd heard Silas Thorne was dead. Silas stood up. He stood slow. He looked at Caleb. Who told him? He wouldn't say, Caleb said. But he was nervous, Silas. He kept looking at the door. He's afraid. Fear is a sign of a broken social contract, Silas said. He reached for his gun belt. When the law is afraid of the truth, the society is in danger. We don't wait for the sheriff. We ride now. We ride for Helena tonight. The doctor said, You need a week, I cried. The doctor isn't being hunted by men who want to burn the truth, Silas said. He looked at me. Clara, this is the final lesson for the valley, the responsibility of urgency. Sometimes the law can wait. Sometimes justice delayed is justice denied. If we sit here, we give the enemy time to rewrite the narrative. We give them time to find a new dead man to witness a new lie. He walked to the door. He moved with a limp, but he moved with purpose. We ride, he said. We stepped out into the mud of Red Creek. The sun was setting. The sky was a bruised orange. People were gathered on the boardwalks now. They were whispering. I saw a man in a black coat watching us from the shadows of the saloon. He had a rifle in his hand. Silas saw him too. He didn't draw his gun. He just walked to his horse. He mounted Jasper in one smooth, painful motion. He looked down at the man in the shadows. I'm Marshal Silas Thorne, he shouted. His voice filled the street. It was the voice of the mountain. I'm riding to Helena to deliver evidence of land fraud. If anyone has a problem with the law, they can find me on the trail. But be warned, the law is coming back with me. The man in the shadows didn't move. He didn't fire. He just watched. Silas turned Jasper toward the north. Ride, he said. We rode out of Red Creek. We rode toward the dark hills of the north. The silent mountain man was leaving the valley. He was leaving the silence behind. He was riding toward the light of the capital. He was riding toward the final judgment. The lesson for the night was clear. Courage is the fuel of justice. Without courage, the law is just words on a page. With it, the law is a force of nature. We rode through the night. The Bitterroots were a dark memory behind us. The future was a cold, bright star ahead. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of something bigger than a name. I was part of the truth, and the truth was moving fast. The mud of Helena was different from the mud of Red Creek. It was deeper. It was mixed with the soot of 1,000 coal fires and the arrogance of a capital city. 1878 was a noisy time for Montana. People were shouting about gold. They were shouting about statehood. They were shouting about the railroad. We rode down to Last Chance Gulch. I sat as straight as my shoulder would let me. Every jolt of Jasper's hooves was a needle in my skin, but a marshal does a slouch, not when he's bringing the truth home. Caleb rode on my left, Clara on my right. We looked like we'd been dragged through the bowels of the mountain, because we had our coats were stiff with dried salt and frozen slush. But we had the satchel. Helena is a loud place, Silas, Caleb said. He was looking at the brick buildings. He was looking at the men in silk hats. Noise is just the sound of people trying to convince themselves they re-important, I said. I pulled Jasper up in front of the territorial courthouse. It was a big building. It had stone pillars that looked like they belonged in a history book. It was a place built to endure. Listen to me, both of you, I said. I leaned over the saddle. I wanted them to hear this before we stepped into the machinery. This is the lesson of institutional integrity, I told them. My voice was low, rhythmic. People think the law is the man in the black robe, or the man with the badge. But it isn't. The law is the institutional framework. It's the idea that the rules stay the same even when the men change. We are here to serve the institution, not the judge's ego, not my pride. We are here to ensure the process of verification works. I looked at the stone steps. Vance tried to destroy the process, I continued. He tried to use a gun to bypass the ledger. That is the definition of anarchy. We are here to prove that the written record is the bedrock of a free society. Without a record that everyone can trust, there is no property. There is no safety. There is only the whim of the strongest man in the room. We are here to say that the truth belongs to the law, not the man. We dismounted. Silas staggered. Caleb caught him. Silas shook him off gently. We walked inside. The floors were polished marble. Our boots made a sound like gunshots in the quiet hall. Clack, clack, clack. Judge Miller's office was at the end of the hall. He was an old man. He had hair like white smoke and eyes that had seen too many lies. He looked up when we walked in. He saw my blood-stained shirt. He saw Clara's tired face. Marshal Thorne, he said. The telegraph said you were dead. The telegraph was misinformed, Judge, I said. It happens when the wires are owned by the people telling the lies. I sat down. I didn't ask. I put the satchel on his desk. This is the Sterling Thorne matter, I said, and it's a matter of procedural fraud. Clara stepped forward. She didn't wait to be asked. She opened the satchel. She laid out the deeds. She laid out the death certificate of Thomas Miller, the man who had witnessed the deed 4 days after he was buried. Judge Miller put on his spectacles. He looked at the papers. He looked at them for a long time. The only sound in the room was the ticking of a grandfather clock. This is a falsification of public records, the judge whispered. It's more than that, Judge, I said. It's a violation of the right to fair dealing. It's a theft of a man's legacy through a constitutional breach. Jedediah Thorne didn't lose that ranch. He was robbed by a ghost signature. I looked at the judge. Here is the verbal lesson for the court, Judge, I said. I made sure my voice was clear. The rule of law is only as strong as the authenticity of the evidence. If you allow a forged deed to stand, you are telling every settler in this territory that their home is a lie. You are telling them that the sanctity of contract is dead. You have a legal obligation to vacate this transfer, not for me, but for the public trust. The judge looked at me. Then he looked at Clara. And who are you, madame? I am Clara Sterling, she said. I am the widow of the man who held this deed. And I am here to testify that my husband's claim was based on a nullified document. I am waiving my right to inheritance on this property. I am asking the court to return it to the rightful heir. The judge leaned back. You're giving up a fortune, Mrs. Sterling. I am gaining my individual integrity, Judge, she replied. And that is a currency that doesn't lose value when the market crashes. The judge nodded. He picked up a pen. Marshal Thorne, he said, this will take time to process. There are filings, there are notices. I don't care about the time, Judge, I said. I care about the verdict of truth. I want it in the books. I want the lie erased. It will be done, Miller said. We walked out of that office. We walked back into the mud of Helena. The sun was low. The shadows of the buildings were long and sharp. It is over, Caleb said. He looked like he wanted to cheer. It is never over, Caleb, I said. I stopped at the edge of the boardwalk. This is the lesson of eternal vigilance, I told him. Justice isn't a destination. It's a chore. It's like chopping wood. You have to do it every day, or the fire goes out. We won a battle today. But the principle of greed is still out there. There will be another Vance. There will be another crooked deed. Our job, your job, is to stay awake, because the right to justice is a fragile thing. It needs a guard who doesn't sleep. I looked at Clara. She was looking at the mountains in the distance. What will you do, Silas? She asked. I am going home, I said. I have a cabin to rebuild. You can't do that alone, she said. I've been alone for a long time, Clara. Maybe, she said, but the right to association means you don't have to be. You have a deputy. And you have a friend. I looked at them, the Sterling boy and the Sterling girl. The silent mountain man felt a strange warmth in his chest. It wasn't the fever from the wound. It was something else. Come on, I said. The mountain is waiting. The spring came to the Bitterroots with a gentleness I hadn't expected. The ice on the creek broke with a sound like crystal bells. The first green shoots of grass pushed through the black soil where my cabin used to stand. We didn't rebuild on the old site. We moved it 100 yards up the ridge to a place where the sun hit the porch first thing in the morning. Caleb and I did the heavy lifting. My shoulder was stiff, but it worked. We hauled the pine logs. We notched the corners. We laid the sod roof. It was a different kind of work than chasing outlaws. It was a work of constructive purpose. Clara lived in a small tent nearby. She was the one who kept us fed. She was the one who kept the books. She was the one who made sure the garden was planted in straight rows. One evening, we sat on the half-finished porch. The air smelled of sap and damp earth. The mountains were a soft, hazy blue. It's quiet here, Silas, Caleb said. He was whittling a piece of cedar. Quiet is where the soul catches up to the body, I said. I looked at the two of them. I felt the need to finish the story, to put the final lesson into words. Listen, I said. They both looked up. We've talked a lot about the law, I began. We've talked about rights. We've talked about truth. But there is one final concept you need to carry with you, the principle of human dignity. I leaned back against the new logs. Dignity isn't something the judge gives you, I said. It isn't something the badge guarantees. Dignity is inherent. It's the worth you have just because you re a person. Vance didn't see dignity. He saw targets. He saw obstacles. He saw profit. When you stop seeing the dignity in others, you lose your own. I looked at Clara. You stood up for the truth when it cost you everything, I told her. That is the exercise of moral courage. It's the highest form of human dignity. You chose the right over the easy. That is what makes a civilization. Not the stone buildings in Helena, but the choices made by people in small cabins. Then I looked at Caleb. You learned that loyalty to a person is good, I said. But loyalty to the universal truth is better. You are a marshal now, not because of the tin on your chest, but because you understand that your power is a delegated trust. You don't own the law, you serve it. That is the ethic of public service. Never forget that the people you arrest have dignity, too. even the ones who have forgotten how to use it. Caleb nodded. He put his knife away. What about Jedediah, Silas? He asked. I looked at the small grave. At the edge of the clearing, he put a new stone there. It didn't say martyr. It didn't say victim. It just said Jedediah Thorn, a man of the mountains. Jedediah is at peace, I said, because the truth is out. We stopped carrying the lie for him. That is the right to be remembered accurately. We don't owe the dead a false history. We owe them the truth. Only the truth can set the living free. I stood up. I walked to the edge of the porch. This valley is a different place now, I said. The railroad is coming. The world is getting smaller. The social landscape is shifting. But the foundational values stay the same. Respect for the person. Respect for the truth. Respect for the law. I turned back to them. The silent mountain man isn't silent anymore, I said, because silence is a luxury we can't afford. We have to speak up for the rights of those who are being left for dead on the trail. We have to be the ones who find them. That is our collective mandate. Clara stood up. She walked over and stood beside me. She didn't say anything. She just watched the sunset. Caleb joined us. We stood there together. A thorn and two sterlings. A marshal, a deputy, and a clerk. We were a new kind of family. A family built on the resolution of conflict. A family built on the recognition of equality. The stars began to come out. They were the same stars that had watched Jedediah, the same stars that had watched the fire. But tonight, they looked like they were watching a beginning. Tomorrow, we finish the roof, I said. Tomorrow, Caleb agreed. The lesson was over. The story was told. The bitter roots were grand. The air was sweet. And for the first time in 30 years, I knew exactly who I was. I was a man of the law. I was a man of the mountains, and I was finally, truly, home. Welcome to a channel dedicated to unforgettable Western stories, tales of cowboys, frontier romance, motherhood, sacrifice, loyalty, and the enduring kindness between ordinary people facing impossible odds. All elements within this narrative are fictional and crafted for storytelling purposes. The author bears no intention of referencing real people, cultures, or events in a literal sense. Readers are encouraged to engage with the work as a piece of creative expression rather than documented reality.
In the end, this story is not only about a marshal, a woman, a burning cabin, or a gunfight in the frozen mountains. It is about the long and difficult road from hatred to understanding. Silas Thorne began as a man chained to grief, believing that revenge was the only way to honor the brother he had lost. Clara Sterling entered his life as the face of an enemy family, someone he believed he had every reason to despise. Yet when the storm came, when life and death stood before him, Silas chose mercy before judgment. And that single choice changed everything. The greatest lesson this story leaves behind is that a human life is worth more than any grudge, any piece of land, any old wound, or any family name. True justice is not born from anger. It is born from truth, courage, and the willingness to see another person as a soul before seeing them as an enemy. Silas learned that the past can explain a man's pain, but it should never be allowed to control his heart forever. Clara learned that truth, even when painful, can become the bridge between two broken worlds. Caleb learned that fear may lead a person into mistakes, but responsibility and courage can lead him back to honor. And for us, watching from the safety of our own lives, the message is clear. We must be careful not to build our lives on assumptions, bitterness, or stories we have never fully questioned. Sometimes the people we blame are carrying wounds of their own. Sometimes the truth is buried deeper than pride allows us to see. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is not pull the trigger, but open the door, offer warmth, and listen. This Western tale reminds us that compassion is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it frees the heart from living inside it. Justice without humanity becomes cruelty, and courage without mercy becomes only another kind of violence. So as the snow settles over the Bitterroot Mountains and the firelight fades from this tale, may we remember Silas Thorne's hardest lesson. A man's soul is not measured by how fiercely he hates, but by how deeply he can still choose what is right. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to join us for more powerful Western stories about cowboys, frontier love, family bonds, sacrifice, motherhood, compassion, and the timeless kindness that keeps humanity alive.